and you're recording it. Okay. Welcome, panelists. Welcome, students, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this breakout session of the High North Dialogue. We are addressing this 1.5 hour session on hydrogen projects in the north. I know that not all of you are experts in hydrogen matters, so I just want to draw your attention to something which is quite clear and quite surprising, that today hydrogen is everywhere, globally, in the EU, in Norway, and in the north. Hydrogen is not a universal solution. It concentrates its credentials as a green solution in the fact that it can be utilized where electricity is not being utilized. So it is not a panacea. It's not something that solves all climate problems, but it solves some very, very important part of the climate problem. So that's why it's so central in the discussion today about green solutions. Today, as I said, we will try to concentrate on concrete projects. There are lots of concrete projects, hydrogen projects being launched all over Norway and Europe at the moment. I have tried, and we have tried, to identify 4 of these projects which we think can be of great importance, and also tell you something more in general about what's happening in this field. So just follow very closely what the 4 presentations will tell you, and it will then be pretty clear that there are lots and lots of very interesting things that are happening in Northern Norway and also in Scotland. We have set aside 10 to 12 minutes for each of the 4 projects. I will gently remind the speakers after 10 minutes, and then they can draw their comments to a conclusion. And then there will be questions and answers from other speakers. People are curious about what actually is happening in the different projects. We will satisfy that curiosity by you asking questions, by the other speakers asking questions, and that will bring us up to about an hour, a little bit more than an hour. And then after that, we do this in 4 projects, as I said, and then we'll have a discussion for a little bit less than half an hour. Everybody can join in, use the chat. I have an assistant who picks up the questions and gives them to me, and I will throw them into the discussion. So that is the way we propose to proceed. The old rules about Teams meetings hold. Please mute, cut your videos so that there are only the people of the panelists who are on screen. And as I said, we can use the chat and use the chat. Tomorrow, as I said, there is going to be a second session which will discuss this from a more policy point of view, and I encourage everybody to take the step from what we hear today as concrete projects into tomorrow's discussion, which are more policy oriented. So that's all I want to say. And it's my great pleasure to introduce the first speaker, Stein Mathisen. He will present the green ammonia project by Varanger Kraft. Stein, say a little bit more about yourself if you want to, and then you have 10 minutes and I will gently remind you of that, and then good luck, and we all look forward to this exciting project. So, the floor is yours, Stein.
So,
what?
Sorry.
Can you hear us?
Now I can hear you.
Yeah.
Is it? Yep.
Yeah. Go ahead.
So you can see my screen as well?
Yes.
Perfect. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Stein Mathisen, working in the Varanger Kraft Group. We head office in Vadsø, but we are placed in several communities in the eastern part of Northern Norway, in the eastern Finnmark, we call it. And I want to present our company group and our projects developing transforming renewables to hydrogen and then to ammonia. So please follow me if you have the time. The Varanger Kraft Group is kind of traditional energy company producing from electricity from hydropower and wind power, and we are transporting it and developing new energy sources as well. We have been here since 1938. There is a company overview. All our business is separated in companies, and we have companies that we own 100%, and we have companies that we have shared with other partners that can provide us to achieve our goals. And according to our goals, we have kind of headlines is sustainable and attractive, and we are attractive because we have to be attractive for our owners, employees, customers, partners, regulators, and the community that's surrounding us, because there is always a question how to own an energy company, and always a question how to provide and serve a company like us. And of course, we have to know where we are. So then it's we have to be competitive in several businesses, and we also have to be aware of the social responsibility we have in our communities. And talking about the area we are in, here you see this map of the Arctic climate zone. There is a certain definition of the Arctic climate zone, and part of Norway is within this zone, and we are operating inside this zone, and you have to have some kind of special skills, we call it. People that have been living here for several generations always has a plan B. You don't know the next day, the weather condition, the vast area, and it's long distances between communities. So you always have to have a plan B when you are living in this area. But you cannot have so much plan Bs when you are starting to develop industries. You have to do it. We try always to do it the right thing the first time, because if you do mistakes, you have always big impacts on the environment, the communities, and the work area, because we are not so many people in a vast area, so we have to be careful what we do, especially now when we are in the climate change. And there is a picture here down on my slide that shows the forecast from temperature increase in our area. That is the highest in Norway as we speak. So, and today it's 13 Celsius outside in the shadow. So maybe we are of course very happy for it, but in the big picture we don't know what's going on. So we have to be careful when we're doing big investments in industrial projects and environmental projects as well. We do also wind farming, as I said earlier. We do hydropower productions in the river, the border river of Hasvik, where we are cooperating with the Russian and the Finns to provide electricity to this area, and also in Russia. So there are, but I will speak only on the wind farming we are doing in Ragovida. It's the top of the Varanger Peninsula, nearby the village of Berlevåg. The site, we found the site in 2008. We developed it since 2010, and we have been producing wind power since 2014. And it's one of the most effective wind sites in Europe. And as Carlsberg says, probably one of the most effective wind sites in the world, perhaps, on land. But there is a whole big capacity, yes, but we have the power grid is not so efficient, so we haven't been able to use the whole concession we have. So we have only, in November, we will be using 50% of the total permit we have to produce wind power in this area. But we are looking forward to use the 50% we have to produce electricity and hydrogen. And this hydrogen project has started on the fact that we have about 100 megawatts stranded wind. And we started in 2013 to analyze how to use the rest of this 100 megawatts. And then we penciled into the hydrogen concept. And in 2018, we competed in the Horizont 2020 program with a pilot, a kind of remote autonomous production facility based on wind power. And we was selected from the EU program, and now we are trying to produce it. And we are as we speak, we are installing the facility and production facility in the building, and we hope to be the first to produce green H2 hydrogen from wind power on a remote control basis from June this year. And if we can make this happen in a profitable way, there is possibilities to copy this study and this project elsewhere, especially in areas where you have a lot of grid capacity problems. Our partners is in Europe, and during this pandemic, it has been a very difficult way to cooperate, but we have been cooperating online and on the digital area, and then but now it starts to open up. So the first equipment is been shipped to Berlevåg, and we are starting now to install it in about 2 weeks. So I hope to present this project and our productions in August if anyone is interested. And then we will have to show how to produce hydrogen by electrolysis, PEM electrolysis in August, and show how to use it in a productive way with a lot of remote control systems. But we are not stopping then on hydrogen because of the willingness to pay in the market, and also the logistics of hydrogen in gas form. We are trying now to innovate further to the ammonia product, and we have connected us with several big partners. The Gabor project, we call it, green ammonia from Berlevåg, will create a new value chain based on our renewables and our knowledge in energy productions. And we also have tested the customers' willingness to pay. So we have been joining forces with the major industrial players in the value chain, and we are now doing the concept study and hope to make the investment decision in third quarter of this year. It's a very interesting project because this looks like there is a lot of interest to maybe replace fossil fuels with ammonia in ships and also in off-grid areas in the Arctic zone, because we have a lot of areas that are producing power or electricity and heat from fossil fuels, and they are looking to replace it with some kind of more carbon-free resources. And when we are placed in Berlevåg, you are very close to Svalbard and Greenland and some parts of the Russian area. So we hope to achieve this project. It's a big scale project, a lot of billion Norwegian kroners, but there is a market. But it's kind of a disruptive project because you are replacing existing value chains. So you have to build a mature market as well as you have to build the factory and the production line. So it's very difficult to have a forecast on all this project, but we believe that when we are trying to
10 minutes
achieve a certain price, then the willingness to pay will give us the push forward. We also try to take care of the communities, so we have a cooperation with the local communities where they are interested in the waste energy, heat and oxygen. And there is 4 concrete projects now that are trying to develop businesses nearby our facility if we are starting up. And the key issues here is to handle capital, competence, and community in everything, because this is a small community, and when you are building an industry like that, you have to be careful with the environment and the communities, and also how to use the capital that you are provided in this area. It's very, very, very complicated because there is not modern infrastructure, industrial infrastructure in this area. So we have to build it from the start. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Brilliant. 12 minutes, exactly on time. Very important and lots of perspectives here. Just one thing, I forgot to tell you that this session is being recorded. Just for the sake of good order, I have to tell you that. Any questions from other people of the panel? There are lots and lots of things to draw parallels from. And do you have any comments or questions? And any of the people who are listening in, they can also ask questions through the chat. So, gentlemen, any questions from the other 3 people on the panel? While you are thinking about this, can I ask you a question, Stein?
Yes, of course.
A lot of discussion about building windmills in this country has been very complicated and difficult politically, and you are in a part of the country where the Sami population lives. Is that an issue? Is that something? How do you handle that challenge?
We've been cooperating with the community since we started up this project in wind farming. So if you mean Sami people and the reader herders, they are the most connected interests in the area. They have this summer living from the reindeer in this area, but our site is above the area that they need to have to do to the reindeers. But to know more, we have a common project where we are following the reindeers by chips. We are chipping the reindeers and following the tracks of the reindeers. And now we've been doing this for 7 years to see how these new wind farms has an impact on the herding. So far we have some issues about visibility, but not much so. But you know, when you're starting a wind farm, you don't know everything about the impact of the environment, and that's why we've been doing this research and development for 7 years. And maybe we are discovering something next year or the year after, and we are adapting to it.
So you are not so worried about this?
So far, we have been managing because we have stopped production, we have stopped traffics in the area in several times. But you have to adapt. You have to do some big considerations when you are operating in this area where there are other interests. So we have to be careful.
Thank you. Any questions from anybody else? If you don't, then thank you very much. This is very exciting, and I even understand that you plan to export part of the green ammonia to Svalbard and Spitsbergen. So that's an extra kind of makes this a very interesting project that many will follow. So thank you very much. Our next speaker, Bjørgulf Eidesen, you will talk about your blue ammonia project by Horisont Energi. So the floor is yours, Bjørgulf.
Yeah, thank you. Just to make sure, can you see my presentation?
Yes.
Yes, excellent. My name is Bjørgulf Eidesen, and I'm heading up Horisont Energi. We're a fairly young company, but I guess in the north, I guess more than the rest of Norway you have heard of us. We have been focusing on Finnmark in most of our work, trying to develop our first project. So just let me start and introduce you to this Barents Blue project. I will change my first slide here. I'm just mention a few things about the company.
Just one thing. There is something wrong about your presentation. Nigel, can you take away your video, and the same with Stein? So maybe. And Nigel, can you just there we are. Now you have the whole screen for yourself. So go ahead. Sorry about that, Bjørgulf, but now we can see it.
Thank you. So Horisont Energi is a company. We are based in the western coast of Norway, and we were founded in 2019. So a fairly young company with head offices in Sandnes. We actually also have an office in Edinburgh, so it's actually the head office that's in Sandnes. We focus on clean hydrogen and ammonia and end-to-end carbon storage as a separate business. And the organization we are developing in the company is fit to then do offshore storage of CO2 and also development of blue ammonia and green ammonia plants. So as a company, we focus on both the blue and the green, so clean ammonia is the main product. Just to introduce you to the project. So we are located with the project in Troms and Finnmark in the Hammerfest Nordkapp area. It's a project that where we will purchase gas locally from the local gas sources, and we will create a gas reforming facility which will then reform this gas to syngas, to CO2 and hydrogen, and we export the CO2 to offshore. and this CO2 will be stored in a local storage. The output from the plant will be mainly ammonia. Hydrogen will only be within the pipes. We will market this ammonia. We are marketing it towards several markets, both in Norway and abroad, and then towards the maritime fuel market, which I guess many have heard of, and also in the chemical industry, fertilizer industry, and also in the power industry. And the facilities that we are developing, it will be one of the biggest ammonia plants in the world, but it will be clean, which is at least at this point in time, there's not a lot of clean large-scale ammonia projects. Some ambitions of the project: we want to develop the most carbon efficient and energy efficient ammonia plant in the world, and Finnmark is a good place to do just that. So we try to make it a zero emission facility, capturing all the CO2. We try to make it self-sufficient on power and to retrieve some renewable power electricity from the grid. We have a high focus on sustainable solutions and circular practices, and it will be fully automated in this plant to maintain high availability and high production. We will focus on to have a low noise level and a very gentle light design, and also focus on how the actual plant will look like, so that we want it to be a landmark, that it's something you can be proud of in the end, that because we expect such a facility, being actually the first one of its kind in Europe, to be somewhere to visit and to get some attention. A part of the development of the plant is to do very efficient winterization and maximize utilization and the benefits of the cold environment. Because in such a facility like this, there's a lot of cooling involved. So being in a cold place has its benefits. It will also be a highly modular construction strategy, meaning that we will construct modules at yards and bring them to Finnmark for hookup and commissioning startup. Just some data. We will produce about 3,000 tons of ammonia per day. I guess the biggest ammonia plant in the world currently is about 3,500 tons in development. It will be above 1 million tons per year, and the CO2 capture rate will be above 99%. And the CO2 to be injected will be about 2 million tons per year. And we also prepare for the future, so that it will be possible to expand this plant with a train 2 and a later train 3. And for the plant on site, we are evaluating 3 sites in Finnmark, in Hammerfest and Nore municipalities. And all the 3 sites are regulated for industrial activity. We will develop a local CO2 value chain. So we will bring the CO2 offshore and store it in a carbon storage offshore off the coast of Finnmark, developing a local CO2 value chain. And this is a illustration of the CO2 concept, the CO2 storage concept we are working on, where we have a very simple development with a cable from shore, a utility and well system, for which we will house the wells of the system down into the structure which will store the CO2. There will be an offshore offloading system where we will have a CO2 carrier vessel dock onto it and inject the CO2 into the reservoir. And we expect it to be about 2 of these vessels. The system is possible to move to other storages later, and we can expand the capacity of adding wells and adding vessels. And it's a good solution to also mitigating some of the risks that you have in the beginning, especially in the beginning of the operation of CO2 storages. The carbon storage asset, as I said, is about 100 kilometers off the coastline. It's a very high quality reservoir, a large structure, and we plan to inject about 2 million tons in the first phase. And we already see an estimate above 100 million tons of estimated storage capacity. So in developing this project, I guess to have the carbon storage is a key part of such a project. Now also, as we have mentioned, is to have a solid land site and also to have a solid processing design. To summarize, I would say that we are developing the first greenfield large-scale clean ammonia plant in Europe. And currently, as far as we know, it's the most carbon energy efficient plant in the world. And the Barents Blue project will deliver, as we said, about 1 million tons of clean ammonia per year, and that's about 5% of the traded ammonia market today. And we will inject 2 million tons of CO2 back into the storage. And in later phases, it's possible to expand and double and triple the injection capacity. And based on this project, we will create a long-term carbon-free industry in Finnmark. And I can also mention to conclude that we see a lot of synergies, I guess, with the other projects of similar kind, green and blue, in Finnmark. I think Finnmark is a great area to develop this business in Norway. So thank you, finishing a little bit ahead of time.
Thank you very much. That was very, very interesting by any standards. Most people, when they talk about hydrogen today in Europe, they talk about green hydrogen. And here you come and you actually put on the table one of the world's largest blue hydrogen projects that is ammonia driven. So this is quite amazing. And I think what you have described is very exciting. I don't understand why there isn't more discussion about this in the world. I mean, you are talking about a world-class kind of concept. Why don't you think there is more big headlines about your project?
Well, we get quite some attention, I have to tell you, from all over the world with this project. So it's a busy days in our company. But I think also that the project is fairly young also because we broadcasted the project the first time in November last year. So until then, we kept a pretty low profile. so that might be one part of that answer. The other part is probably that I guess it's, you know, the discussions in the market these days focus mostly on the green production, I think, and we are also very in favor of green production and would like and are developing early phase green productions ourselves. But we think that in order to actually scale this clean hydrogen business, blue ammonia is very efficient to provide large scale volumes very early on, and meeting, I guess, the expected demand for this product. But I think that so far, blue ammonia has not been the main focus in the discussions in Europe, especially. I guess in other parts of the world, in Asia, there's a lot more focus on blue, maybe also in the US and Australia. But in Europe, it's been the main focus on green, I would say, at least up until now.
Questions from the chat. How do you manage this project in financial terms? Are there any challenges, especially in terms trades-off between revenue generation and investment in sustainable future? So that was a question from one of the people who have been listening to us.
Yes, and I can begin by saying that when developing blue and green projects, it's both good and it's not so good projects in blue and green. And I would say that, and I think also the last presentation demonstrates also that this area is very well suited for these kinds of projects. You have a lot of benefits in this area, so it's not an easy task to develop a project like this and shape a project like this. And I guess Kraft can probably also talk about that part of it. So I think that if you manage to develop an attractive project, the capital market is very interesting. So I would say that for our project, we have a lot of let's say attention and priority, I would say, also in the capital market. So from our perspective, it's there's a lot of need for projects like this also to be financed in the capital market. So financing is actually not a big challenge in a project like this. If you have a good project, you will get financing. So we don't. It's not really trade-off between, I would say, financing and revenue. There are other things that are sort of the main issues in projects like this.
One last question from somebody else. Do you have the technology for the CCS? Is that readily available? Do you know which technology you are going to use?
Yes, we have our base case of how to develop this, which we think will minimize the exposure, risk and financial exposure of the CO2 injection system. The technology, you can say, is available. We have developed this technology, you can say, of the systems that we use internally, but using, let's say, technology that is available in the market and putting this together as a package. So element by element, it's proven, or it's, let's say, well qualified.
Thank you. We have to move to the third, but that was extremely interesting. We have presented one green and one blue hydrogen project, and both from Finnmark, and I must say Finnmark is really well placed to actually do something grand in the field of hydrogen. So thank you very much to both of you. And now let's move a little bit further south to Mo. Jan, Gabor, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you for the invitation. My name is Jan Gabor. I am working as a business and property development manager and director in the Mo Industrial Park in Mo i Rana. But today I'm representing a consortium for some partners working with hydrogen for an industrial purpose. So the partners in this project is CELSA, who is a company producing reinforcement steel based on scrap steel in the industrial park. The second partner is Kraft, as you probably all know. And Mo Industrial Park is the property and infrastructure company supplying with well, infrastructure services. So I'm just going to show you a short movie just to give you an idea of the industrial park and how it looks. Yes, so this project is first of a kind, where we are preparing for using hydrogen in the rolling mill at CELSA. I'll show you a picture of that later. But we are aiming for producing or for establishing a complete value chain for green hydrogen. In the first stage, we'll use it for industrial use at CELSA. But we also may have some other activities in line on this project. So the end product will be the world's most climate-friendly reinforcement steel. And we aim to use to reduce the emissions by 60% of the current emission from this process. This is a picture of the industrial park. CELSA has their steel plant over here where they melt all the scrap steel, and they have the rolling mill in this building, and where they preheat the steel billets before it goes into the rolling mill, before it becomes reinforcement steel. And this is the area where they need to preheat the steel billets before it enters the actual production rolling mill. So the value chain is like this, pretty simple. Statkraft is the hydrogen by water electrolysis. And water electrolysis, when that is offered in a surplus area close to the actual water production, it will offer the very best LCA standards of the finished products. Which will be reinforcement steel at CELSA, and they will in their turn do some furnace upgrades in order to use hydrogen instead of CO gas and other fossil sources as they're using today. So the project is have different work packages, and of course we need to look at the risk and the CapEx, OpEx, which is kind of an issue these days. Hydrogen isn't exactly in position to have very high funding from the funding schemes as it is today in Norway. So you have to look to Europe in order to have some real support from the hydrogen electrolysis production itself. But we are in a established infrastructure and looking at circular gains when you are established together with other companies. So this is the electrolyzer plants. Statkraft has signed a letter of intent with Nel, and they are of course looking into how to improve power consumption or reduce the power consumption, lower the OpEx and lower the CapEx. And this is basically probably one of the core issues that all of the green hydrogen producers are looking at. But on the other hand, green hydrogen will have a significant role in the future hydrogen market, probably also together with blue and other hydrogen production with different sources. So this is the planned upgrades on the furnace, and here you can see the steel billets being preheated before it enters the rolling mill. And this is where we want to use hydrogen instead of CO gas or fossil fuels. So I showed you the picture. There are two main processes, and the rolling mill has the potential of reducing the emissions by almost 60,000 tons each year by changing to fuel to hydrogen. And if we are to what is a bit complex today is when you're looking at the funding schemes, hydrogen production, well, it's commercialized already, and this rolling mill is operating. But when you're presenting these known technologies put together in a new way, aiming for producing products in a new way, it's a very high degree of innovation level. But it still doesn't fit into the Norwegian funding schemes because they're looking at as a hydrogen production and an established process. So that is what we're looking into, how we can have support for the CapEx, OpEx, and we're looking to the European funding schemes for the moment. In the longer run, we're also looking into how to produce other areas or markets for the hydrogen, because hydrogen production itself isn't a very it isn't a lot of ripple effects by producing something and just exporting it, because there are not a lot of labor, it's not too much logistics, but it's power consuming. But if you look into how hydrogen can support other areas like CCU, use of CO2 for creating new products, for instance, e-fuels or proteins, then you will have a very scalable industrial opportunity by using hydrogen together with captured CO2 from local emission places. We're also looking into how CO2 or hydrogen can play a role into heavy transport and ferries, for instance. So in total, we see that Statkraft may have the ambition to be able to establish between 200 and 300 megawatts of green hydrogen production in this area, which is a surplus hydropower area, offering very favorable both power and grid pricing. Also then in an already established industrial environment with other companies supporting circular business models. So by that, Petter, I think I am just ahead of schedule.
Thank you very much. Any questions in the chat? No, nothing. Any comments from your fellow panelists? Do you have any kind of things to say? Bjørgulf, how does this look to you as a sort of industrial man interested in sort of creating more activities in Northern Norway? Do you think this is interesting? Yes. You must unmute.
Okay, thank you. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think this is also a very interesting project, and I think that the real challenge, I guess, with most of the hydrogen projects is to fully establish the value chain, both the supply of renewable power at a steady level, and also the output, and get say a output or sink that's always there when the hydrogen comes. So that's so establishing this and building it up like to do in Mo. I think it's a very correct strategy, and then can expand from there with new value chains that are more, let's say, external to the location. So I think most hydrogen projects need to start the way that Mo is doing it, comparing it to what is done in Berlevåg, and where you have ammonia. Ammonia is it's a big market today, so you can place the volumes there if you can compete on price. But I think that I guess the Mo project is quite a model project of how to industrialize this.
Stein, do you have anything to add to this kind of way of going about creating hydrogen and building industrial activities around it?
Well, we know a little about LKAB's project in the northern Sweden, and I can see some similarities in the mining industry and the metallurgic industry, using hydrogen as a component instead of fossils. So that is very interesting, and I'm happy for this project in Mo, and I hope you can succeed in trying to reduce the carbon emissions from the metallurgic industry as well, because we have a same kind of similar project here in Varanger area, where you have new owners now are looking into it. The same kind of use of hydrogen in producing iron. Thank you.
Jan, I have a question for you. We all read about what's happening in northern Sweden at LKAB, which makes all the projects that we have been talking about so far nothing. They are dwarfs compared with what the Swedes are actually planning. Can you say a little bit? I mean, when people talk about your project, they sometimes say this is green steel, and then people say it's exactly the same kind of thing that they are trying to do in Sweden. Can you say a little bit for the ones of us who are not experts on this? Is this comparable? Are you trying to do part of the same? And while you're at it, can you tell us a little bit more about the Swedish project?
Well, I will not go into detail about the Swedish project, other than I believe they are using it for a direct reduction of actually in the melting process. But what we're doing is to using it in a heat. This is a scrap steel based reinforcement steel producer. So they remelt scrap. They don't produce the iron from iron ore using hydrogen as the reduction. So it's very complementary. It's a kind of a different part of the value chains in sort of a different kinds of processes. So it's quite complementary to the project in LKAB. But LKAB, they are being very working very good in how to actually launch this project, because well, Sweden is inside the EU, and they are better than Norwegians to look into how EU can support these kinds of initiatives. For one thing, you have this project called Important Project of Common European Interest, which opens up for direct support to actual investments. So you don't have to be a part of the regulative that regulates how much support you can have for direct investments. And they are also looking, they are also better at evaluating what is innovation, is the fact that you're putting together several known technologies into one new process. They recognize that as innovation, which of course it is. We are not quite as good in Norway to do the same. So we are a bit hard on ourselves when we are looking into our own processes, and they are better at it in Sweden and basically Finland also.
Or do they have a government which is more willing to cough up money?
Well, it's easier for them as long as they know how to do it without being in conflict with the EU regulations. But yes, of course, you can see it in the data center business. You see it in the battery cell production business. You see it in the hydrogen business. Yes, they are ahead of us in all these sectors at the moment.
And I saw Stein sort of nodding. Is this a familiar kind of nowhere into the discussion? And Nigel, we are not eating into your time. Don't worry about that. But I think we meet an issue, and let's face it, and let's talk about it while we have it. Is this saying something about are we as a government, are we as a nation less capable of sort of grasping new opportunities? Is it that dramatic? Because what you're describing is really a very bad situation for Norway. I mean, Sweden know how to do it. They know how to sort of tap the money out of the EU. They basically know how to be, and I would think, why isn't Norway as clever as the Swedes?
I can't answer the question about the cleverness between Sweden and Norwegians. I don't know, but I can answer. We have been looking into it, and we also been applying for funding, Norwegian and EU funding. So we know about the system and the consideration they do in EU and in Norway. As the other partners in this panel has told us that when you do kind of new innovation with using known components and put it together in another kind of production line or value chain, you have to do some, maybe the result is some kind of disruptions in existing value chains. So I'm a big fan of big push theory from the governmental side. So if they want to push it in the green direction or blue direction in hydrogen, they have to show us the money and the interest in behind it. And now they are divided in several institutes. You have the Norwegian Research Council, you have Innovation Norway, you have Enova, you have several research and governmental institutes that are kind of cooperating, but not cooperating enough to make it happen fast enough. So that's why I think Sweden is ahead of us.
Well, that was quite a strong statement. Anyway, but Bjørgulf, your background is from the oil industry, right?
Correct, yes.
I mean, Norway didn't seem to have much problem about being creative and actually finding money when it came to building a huge and efficient oil industry.
I think that looking back, there have been many different schemes targeting the technology for the oil and gas business, because it's been a very sort of a lucrative business for the government. That's been a lot of income. You know, we all know this. So a lot of schemes have been put together to sort of try to improve the both the, let's say, later years the carbon footprint, but the earlier years the earnings, focusing on increased recovery and these things. I think that what's being said here is maybe Norway in Scandinavia being a bit behind our neighboring countries. But I think what it recently did when Norway adopted the IPCEI hydrogen and wanted to be part of that, I think that's a very good step. And Norway have also done this, you know, pilot B, which is, I guess, a model of how to cooperate between the three units, like Stein mentioned. So I think there are very positive, let's say, movements around us. I think it's true that we are a bit behind our neighbors, Finland, Sweden, and Denmark, in really, let's say, pushing ahead towards, or let's say, the movement that's happening all over Europe. But I think we are getting there, but a bit behind. I guess a piece of advice there would maybe be to, I guess, yeah, sorry. A piece of advice there is maybe to look at cooperate with other European companies that have done this for a long time, and so that's what we are doing.
Great.
One comment, Peter, if I may.
Yes, Jan, go ahead.
Yes, because this is not by pointing to any of the funding schemes, not Enova or Gassnova, because they are operating within their mandates. I think it's more of a governmental sense of urgency, how we are actually addressing the fact, are we going to compete, in what scale and how fast? And then you need to issue some resources, and you need to issue some mandates for the funding schemes to operate within, because it's a lot of very, very skilled people also within those schemes, but they have to kind of maneuver within the borders or the boundaries they have within their mandates. So it's basically a sense of urgency, I think, straight up to our politicians.
Well, that was, we took a little bit of the sort of discussion between you, which was meant to come after Nigel was saying something. But I think this round, which was 10 minutes of very interesting discussion and pointing out differences between us and our neighbors, and maybe looking a little bit ahead. No, I'm not trying to throw out Nigel, but there is one more thing that is on my mind just now, and that is we are now talking about cooperation between the Nordic countries, and also we will throw in Scotland. Now, I see in my screen, I see an old friend of mine, Mr. Krivorotov, and he is just waving to us. He is Russian. I used to work with him in Russia many years ago. We have not heard anything about Russia as an actor in this. And I know it's not on the agenda, but since I saw you, Andrei, is it possible for you to say something very, very briefly about how Russia is actually thinking about hydrogen? I know it's a totally but I couldn't resist it when I saw your face. So if you just say something for a minute, can you just say a little bit?
Sure. Thank you very much, Peter. It's a great pleasure to see you and everybody here. Very briefly, as bullet points, I can say the following. Russia is a bit lagging behind in terms of hydrogen, but we are trying to catch it up now. The government has adopted a special plan of action in late 2020 to essentially increase the production of hydrogen with a view of its export either by sea or by a gas pipeline. Our researchers are now doing an extensive study of how to best do this in a safe and sustainable manner. Yamal LNG is a great Russian, French, Chinese LNG producer in Yamal Peninsula. Announced plans last fall to essentially establish a hydrogen production, also export-oriented within foreseeable future. Plus Murmansk district, which is neighboring to Norway, there have been some plans to produce essentially I think it's blue hydrogen powered with a wind park, which was established last year. Last but not the least, as an assistant professor of Mjimo University, who has been a partner of University Nore for 30 years, I'm also very pleased to say that we in our university have established a dedicated research center for hydrogen energy just a couple of months ago, with a view of both research and education and educating young Russians to do the business. Last but not the least, our Minister of Energy, Mr. Novak, came with an article just a few days ago where he says that Russia can export up to 20-25 million tons of hydrogen per year, although essentially industry analysts doubt whether it will be doable because we do need much of hydrogen for our domestic reasons as well. Thank you very much.
Well, that was truly worth it. I mean, doing a little detour around Russia, you gave us a lot of things to think about, Andrei, and one day we will pick up the things, and maybe a big Norwegian-Russian cooperation in the field of hydrogen is possible. Who knows? And it sounds like, well, that the Bjørgulf ought to think hard about competition from Russia, because they also have stranded gas. So here, follow what is happening. Anyway, this was a detour, but I'm sure everybody thought that was well worth it. No, Nigel, the floor is yours. I'm sorry, don't take it as an insult that we sort of did some detours before we got to you, but Scotland is, nobody knows what will happen to Scotland, and so we will listen very, very carefully to what you say. And so the floor is yours. And thank you to everybody who has been contributing to this little detour. So Nigel, go ahead.
So thank you very much, Peter. I'm going to give you a quick run through some areas in Scotland that are actually taking a lead on hydrogen projects. So unlike the previous speakers, I'm not concentrating on just one project. It's a family of projects. So if I succeed in opening my presentation and going into that, Peter, can you see the screen now? Okay.
Yes, no problem.
Excellent.
Go ahead.
Excellent. So, just to start out, the reason there is a lot of activity in Scotland has been the ambitions of the Scottish government to decarbonise and to reach net zero. And we have a target for net zero by 2045. We're catching up with Norway. Our electricity is now almost 100% renewable, but we will continue to actually produce more electricity and use that for making the hydrogen that can help us to clean up the rest of the energy system. And the projects I'm going to describe to you, starting with one that's looking at hydrogen for heating in houses, then moving up to Aberdeen, which you're probably familiar with, a big oil and gas hub in Scotland, where they're now looking at blue hydrogen and green hydrogen. Then up to the north of Scotland, to the Orkney Islands, which used to be part of Norway at one point. And then coming back down to Cromarty, a port which is emerging as a potential green hydrogen hub. And hopefully this will give you some ideas about what's going on in Scotland and how some of this might be relevant to what you're doing in Norway. Very quickly about the association, we've got about 150 members, academic, industry, and also local and city authorities, bringing the activity together that we need to do to make this all happen. The backdrop of the targets, these are the carbon reduction targets for Scotland. So everybody concentrates on net zero, 100% greenhouse gas reduction by 2045. Actually, the one that is probably most difficult is the target for 2030, which is a 75% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions, which also includes emissions from shipping and aviation. So it's a bit of a stretch target. Anyway, starting on our transition to low carbon energy, the amount of electricity that we produce from renewables in Scotland has gone up steadily over the past 20 years and is now almost 100%. That's a great achievement, but if you look at the overall demand of energy in Scotland, and I'm sure you'll have something similar in Norway, electricity on this chart is actually the dark green line that's running along the bottom of the chart. The blue sort of jaggy line above it is transport, and the green line that is you see is almost like a sine wave up and down based on the time of the year. That is the demand for heat. And the heat demand, as in most countries, fluctuates massively throughout the year. And in Scotland, one of the characteristics of heat is that most of that heat is provided by fossil fuels. For example, 85% of domestic heating comes from natural gas in Scotland. So we have a challenge of how do we decarbonise heat as well as decarbonising electricity and transport. So the 4 projects I'm going to talk to you about, as I say, we're starting in Fife in Methil, moving up to Aberdeen, then to Orkney, and then to Cromarty. So in Methil in Fife, we have a site called the Hydrogen Office. This was opened about 10 years ago. You see it on the picture here. It's just to the right of the wind turbine, quite a small wind turbine. But over the past 10 years, the key thing about this project is it's provided a lot of education and outreach to the pupils and students in the local area. And one of the speakers earlier mentioned the importance of community. And I think we must never forget that. It's about trying to establish the link between the technology and the community. And that's what this project has done. And it's actually set the foundations for other projects. They brought in a fleet of hydrogen vehicles about 5 years ago by scaling up the production of hydrogen on this site. But the next step is the real challenge. And this is the project to actually convert about 300 households from using natural gas to using 100% hydrogen, green hydrogen from an offshore wind turbine. You can just see it on the picture, just at the right of the picture. That will produce the hydrogen that goes to households that you also see in the picture through pipelines in the streets. So the streets already have the gas pipeline. They will add in hydrogen distribution network, and the consumers will be given a choice. Do you want to stay with natural gas, or would you like to try green hydrogen? So it's a big trial, both of the technology and also of the public acceptance of green hydrogen for heat. And if it works, then in a couple of years' time, this view of Methil in Fife, the houses that you see on the hill, they will be being heated, some of them be heated by green hydrogen from the wind turbine that you see in the middle of the picture. But also in the Fife area, just up from Fife is the Grangemouth area, which is a big industrial area. And so there's work going on to see how you could connect together potential areas of hydrogen production, also shipping of CO2 out into other areas where it could be sequestered. So again, this was mentioned earlier, the importance of looking at blue and green hydrogen. And this is where Aberdeen comes into the picture. So about 150 kilometres up from Edinburgh, Aberdeen, the traditional oil and gas capital of Scotland, of the UK, is now making a transition from oil and gas to clean energy. And as part of that, they've been involved in various European projects. So the FCHJU, as mentioned already, Aberdeen has been very successful with the hydrogen bus fleet came in, started operating in 2015. They've travelled 1 million kilometres, carried a couple of million passengers, and they are now starting to reap the benefits from the early refueling station. So this is the refueling station that has been used for the buses, and it's proved the operational, the reliability credentials of the buses. And Aberdeen is now replacing its first fleet of buses, the 10 single-decker buses, by 25 double-decker buses. So the interest in the hydrogen buses has increased, and they're starting to expand that fleet using hydrogen that is produced locally. But it's not just about the buses, it's about where does the hydrogen come from? And in the future, we think this will be coming from offshore wind, coming into the harbour in Aberdeen, probably by pipeline. And they're now starting to think about the other uses this hydrogen could be used for. For example, heavy-duty trucks as well as the buses, possibly trains, but also when it comes to actually supporting the building of the offshore wind turbines. The boats that currently take the workers out to the installation are using fuel, diesel typically, and we believe these could be replaced by hydrogen. So this is actually a boat which is coming onto the market very soon for actually moving service engineers from the shore out to the wind farms for construction and for maintenance in the future. But going forward, we see the challenge to start off with will be scaling up the renewables quickly enough to actually achieve the economies of scale. And for this reason, there is also work going on in Scotland with blue hydrogen at a location called St Fergus. The project is called the Acorn Project. And this is very much about starting to scale up the production of hydrogen from natural gas, blue hydrogen, using the carbon capture and storage that's been mentioned earlier. And with that, actually getting the scale that brings the cost of the hydrogen down, that allows it to be used in other applications, in particular industry and for heat. And the challenge will be actually not just how we use it locally, but going forward, potentially starting to export this hydrogen. So as the comment from Russia, exporting using pipelines and shipping. And we believe the pipelines could be really important. And this has been recognised also in Europe, for example, with the Hydrogen Europe study that proposed the national hydrogen backbone, transnational hydrogen backbone for Europe. But from big scale to small scale, local scale, up to the Orkney Islands. And this is an area in the UK which has been probably ahead of most in terms of achieving a high amount of renewable energy, 100% green energy by 2014. But that brought its own challenges. And when you look at the schematic here, you can see some of the islands that have wind turbines, but they didn't have enough demand, or the connections weren't strong enough. So often the wind turbines were being turned off, curtailed. I think that was mentioned earlier as well, stranded wind assets. And the use of the hydrogen is actually to start to use that stranded asset more effectively, to use some of the hydrogen for the community projects. So on the island of Shappensea, the community school will be using the hydrogen for heat, but they will still have more than they need. And so they will move it, they're already moving it by ship, by ferry, from the islands down to the main port of Kirkwall. And you can see just on the left, a tube trailer, which carries the hydrogen, a blue box, which has got the fuel cell that provides power to the ships when they're in the harbour. And you can also see some of the vehicles, so the vans that use hydrogen fuel cell range extended electric vans as part of the Big Hit and Surf and Turf projects. Going forward, again, a lot of this is linked to Europe, but we see aviation trials starting to happen. The plane on the left, that's a real plane. That's actually down in the south of England undergoing trials. It was meant to be in Orkney, but COVID knocked that on the head. And on the right is a 9-seater plane, which will be converted to run on hydrogen. So that's a conversion of an existing turboprop to actually run on hydrogen fuel cell electric powertrain. Going forward, 10 minutes, right, I'll speed up. We hope that the whiskey and the gin from Orkney will be using hydrogen to make it, so-called hydrogen. And finally, the port of Cromarty already being used for offshore oil and gas service and maintenance. We'll see that being becoming a hub for green hydrogen support and maintenance, but also for green hydrogen use, linking into the scaling up of offshore wind. So a lot of offshore wind starting to be installed around the east coast of Scotland. The target is for 11 gigawatts of offshore wind in Scottish waters by 2030. And locations like Cromarty will be hubs that can actually bring in that electricity, turn it into hydrogen, use it potentially in local areas. And we're thinking of distilleries as one of the early markets, but also going into heating and transport in local communities and cities. And then, and this is part of the Scottish Government's hydrogen policy statement, using that opportunity to overproduce green hydrogen and to export that into international markets, either by ship or by pipeline. And when you start to look at the demand, very much in the centre of Europe, so this is actually a really nice illustration of the locations around Europe which can produce that renewable energy and turn it into a commodity or a product like hydrogen and move it. And ultimately, this will help us all to achieve the target of net zero. So very quickly, hopefully that's given you a sense of what's going on in Scotland, how that fits into the wider picture around Europe. And I hope later this year we will actually be hosting the COP26 Climate Summit, and we might see some of you in Glasgow for further discussions. Thank you very much for listening.
Brilliant. 12 minutes.
Good. Okay. So hopefully now, if I can work out how to unshare my screen, I'll give you back control.
There you are. Very nice. I must say it's very impressive by what you are actually managing to do in Scotland, or certainly what you are planning to do. And it's the question is, you basically gave us a lot of different kind of initiatives. Can you say whether any of these are really what the government is going most for? It's a little bit like shooting with a shotgun, and there were so many different things that you were touching on. Is the government saying this is the most important of all of these projects?
Well, the target for the government is they have a policy statement with an ambition for 5 gigawatts of low carbon hydrogen production by 2030 and scaling that up further by 2045 to probably about 20-25 gigawatts. But the big challenge is actually the 2030 target. So the next 10 years, 9 years, in fact, how we actually scale up not just the supply of hydrogen, but also the demand. So without the demand, there is absolutely no business case for making the hydrogen. And at the moment, the demand just isn't at the level of 5 gigawatts of hydrogen supply. So the answer is actually, it's not just one project that we need to create that demand. It's lots of projects, and it could be smaller projects, but lots of them. It could be large projects that actually give you that anchor load. So very interested to hear the description of the green ammonia and the blue ammonia projects in Norway. There are also very similar approaches in Denmark. Denmark's doing a lot of work around what they call power to X projects. We're seeing this happening also in Spain. And that is actually a very good way of starting to build up the local demand for the hydrogen. But as I mentioned, there is a lot of energy used in Scotland for heating that comes from natural gas. So one of the quick wins is actually to start to convert. So we have about 2.5 million households in Scotland, and the Scottish Government recently has set a target that they want to move 1 million of these households to essentially zero emission heat. And some of this could be electrification, heat pumps, but a large part of it could be the use of green hydrogen, or in the interim stage, blue hydrogen, because if we can get that hydrogen into the gas networks, that infrastructure is there already. We know that it can be repurposed from carrying natural gas to using hydrogen, either as blends or as 100% hydrogen. And that will give us a very quick win in an area that's actually very difficult to do otherwise, because we don't have, as Norway does, all of our households pretty much running on electricity. As I say, 85% of households in Scotland are heated with natural gas. A lot of industry is also heated with natural gas. So if we can start to decarbonise the gas networks, then that gives us a very simple way of essentially converting existing gas users from high carbon emissions to almost zero carbon emissions. Now, it's not as simple as that. Yeah, we need to change the appliances. There are things that we need to do with some of the pipelines to make sure the steel is the right type of steel. So it's not a magic wand. It's not a silver bullet, but it can actually provide potentially a very large contribution towards carbon reduction.
Thank you. Of course, there is very limited that Norway can contribute when we're talking about household use of natural gas and switching it. So, but that's a very important thing for you. And Leeds, some years ago, actually went through a whole transition of trying to transform the gas supply into hydrogen supply for the city of Leeds. And that worked quite well. So this is something for the British Isles. It's not something much for Norway, but it's still for us very important and interesting to notice.
Yeah, and thank you for mentioning the Leeds project. So the Leeds Citygate project was done by one of the 5 gas distribution companies in the UK. Northern Gas Networks led that feasibility and engineering study, and that provided the basis for the UK government to start to put a lot more effort into developing this area, with a big programme of research development. And the project I described in Methil is part of the pathway towards actually proving what was put down as a feasibility study by the Leeds project into some real evidence on the ground in terms of using hydrogen for heat. And yeah, yes, this is all about household heating, but a lot of the learning will carry across into commercial and into industrial applications for hydrogen for heat as well. So hopefully there might be some uses for some of the use of hydrogen for heat in Norway that we can actually share experience with on that.
Thank you. I want to draw in the last 2 elements, Stein and Jan. Can you come back into the screen? And Andre, if you can mute yourself can you switch off your video? Yes, there we are. The 4 people who has taken us so very competently through the descriptions today. We have a question from one of the people who have been following us, who says, and he mentioned Stein, who at one point mentioned the aspect of cooperation as a crucial one for hydrogen projects development in the north. So what can countries do better in that sense, and Scotland in particular? Is there something that we can learn from Scotland? Is there something, I mean, that the 4 of you want to bring to the table in terms of more cooperation even within Northern Norway? Is that something that we can aim for? Is there something that Nigel and his groups can learn from the blue and the green hydrogen in Finnmark? That's another one. But let's start with let's continue a little bit on the Scottish side. Is there anything that you can think about where there can be more cooperation across the North Sea? And anybody? Is this something that Nigel, you also jump in, of course, whenever you feel like it. But I think I'm trying to get my Norwegian compatriots to basically think about this. Is this such a different situation, or do you think that For instance,
I can offer an opinion.
Yeah.
I would say that looking at what is happening, let's say on the UK side, I think it's a very well organized work, doing, let's say, organizing communities into developing, the downstream part of the hydrogen value chain, which is, as was said here, key. If you have a lot of hydrogen production but don't have anyone using it, it doesn't really matter. So I think there's the way of clustering, the way of organizing infrastructure, the way of setting up users and markets and industries, and transforming them into being users of these new green fuels is really important. And I think that's not a lot of places around that are as well organized as the UK or as advanced, I think, in this type of work. I think there are some things happening now in Northern Norway, and maybe on Mo is maybe an example also. But I think that we have a lot to learn from the structured approach that they apply in the UK.
Jan, do you have any comments to what Nigel was saying?
Yes, well, maybe not directly to Nigel, but when it comes to operating north, there are some issues regarding operating in vulnerable areas, which itself is an interesting platform to develop between partners looking into different activities in Nordic areas. And we already have some platforms. We applied for support in the Green Platform initiative issued by Innovation Norway and Enova and others. I believe it was before Christmas. So we already have a cooperation with partners in Glomfjord, Bodø, other places regarding hydrogen, aiming for kind of developing a joint initiative working on topics that are relevant for all partners within the concept. And also we are a part of a group called Energi in North, which is well, Petter Arctic was probably one of the driving forces behind it, but it's led by the Knowledge Park in Bodø, which also is a quite open platform for cooperation within these kinds of topics. And I think maybe those platforms are relevant in order to have international cooperation, because then you have an already existing platform, maybe financed, maybe led by someone that can organize also together with similar Scottish or other initiatives.
Right. Stein, do you have, we have 2 minutes left, and we are starting to get into the to the final stretch here. Is there anything else you want to say about cooperation that can sort of lead us into the end of this session? Is there something from your perspective that you want to particularly point to?
I just would like to comment on the Scottish sides, because I was in a similar dialogue meeting online with the EU system, and they were the Scottish industry, Scottish kind of entrepreneurial cooperation was informing us about the hydrogen strategy in Scotland. And I was impressed about the clearness in what to do and how to do it in time and schedule. And that's kind of a good example I believe we can adopt in Norway as well. Because as Nigel has said, and the ambassadors from Scotland in the other meeting, there is a value chain has to be created. There is some kind of new kind of logistics that have to be created, and we are trying to draw the map now. And Scotland has showed us how to do it, so I'm impressed. And to the cooperation part in Nordic country, we have to remember that we have a great and steady and well-proven cooperation in transition of the electric energy in between the Nordic countries, and that's been developing for several years, and that makes our separate countries dependent on each other. So there is a kind of structure and system in this electric energy transition system between the Nordic countries that you have to look into when you are starting to draw the map on hydrogen and green fossil fuels or green fuels transition in the future. So I would look into the grid operators in the Nordic country, how they're thinking, how is this constructing, and what is the forward scenario.
Thank you very much. And Nigel, you get the last word of the panel.
So I think looking at cooperation, I think that there's two opportunities I would see here. Is despite leaving Europe, the UK is rejoining the Horizon Europe program, for the next 5 or 6 years, and there may be opportunities there to work with partners from Norway and other European countries in areas that we have common interest. So I think the work that's being done in Norway on blue hydrogen could be a really interesting one. I think there's other approaches for making the energy transition from an oil and gas production network to how we can actually use that in the future in low carbon and renewables. But also, as well as working with Europe, are there any opportunities to have more direct bilateral agreements between Norway and Scotland on areas that are a specific common interest that we might be able to use to take us both forward? And I think that's maybe a discussion that we should fire up to the people who have these discussions at the political level, but informed by the areas that are actually relevant. So I think there's a part here for people from industry to actually come together and to try and understand, where do we have the common challenges, where do we have the common interests that would actually work for both countries if we actually had a bilateral agreement in place, and use that to help us move forward.
Thank you very much. Thanks to everybody who has been listening in. Thanks to the 4 panelists who have in different ways exposed very interesting single projects. And we even got into a discussion about how to make this into a more cooperative venture across the North Sea and within our own part of the world. So I think we got a little bit further. Extremely nice presentations. Thank you for taking the time. Thanks for taking the effort. And again, on behalf of High North Dialogue, you can follow the discussion tomorrow. And if you have time this afternoon, you can even get to the big political discussion between the Prime Minister and the leader of the opposition. And they are both, by the way, very interested in hydrogen. So there we are. And thanks a lot to everybody. And that will be all for now. Thanks. Bye-bye.